Hey everyone, welcome back to another video of mine where today we're going to be solving Leetcode problem 128 titled Longest Consecutive Sequence. So we're given an unsorted array of integers nums and we simply need to return the length of the longest consecutive elements sequence. And we must write an algorithm that runs in O of n or linear time, right? Where n simply represents the length of our input, which in this case is our nums array. Right? And so the first thing you may be thinking to yourselves is, why is this unsorted? Why can't this be sorted? And the reason was, if this was sorted, then the longest consecutive sequence would simply match the length of our array, which of course completely takes away from the point of this problem and the goal or lesson that it's trying to teach us, basically the algorithm that we're trying to derive from this type of problem. Right? So let's see how we can approach this problem effectively. Right, so we're in example 1, we have a nums input array of 100, 4, 200, 1, 3, and 2. And our output would be 4 because the longest consecutive elements in the sequence is 1, 2, 3, and 4. And therefore, its length is going to be 4, right? So we'd output 4. We don't have to actually output the elements that are contiguous, or not contiguous, but consecutive themselves within our array, but simply the length that actually, or how many numbers there are, that's the longest that actually are consecutive. Right, and note that 1, 2, 3, and 4, they're not, this is not a contiguous subarray. They are from different positions or different indexes from our input array. And so this subarray that we're kind of looking for that has the longest consecutive sequence that's increasing, it's not going to be contiguous. That's also very important. Right? It's just that the next index or next element within our input array just has to be within the nums array rather than right next to it, right, or an indice after it, adjacent to it. And if we apply that same logic to example 2, we have 9 consecutive elements. That's the longest amount within our input array nums, and so we would therefore output 9. And for our constraints, the length of the nums array is going to be less than 100,000 and greater than 0, and nums at I is going to be greater than or equal to, I believe that's 100 million, right, or the absolute value of 100 million. Okay. So an important way to go about this is we want to look for every number that starts or marks the beginning of a new cycle, right? That means that if n minus 1 isn't actually in our nums array, right, as we look through for n in nums, that means it's the start of a new cycle, and we can keep incrementing a count or length for that specific window at that start of that specific cycle or that nth indice to keep seeing if it actually is greater than our longest length that we've recorded so far. And we'll use this set because we don't need to worry about any duplicates, and it does have an O of 1 lookup time, which is far better than array's O of n linear lookup time, and so we will use a set on the nums input array. So let's get started with the code. We'll say our set is going to be equal to the set with the parameter being our nums input array, right? And if you guys aren't aware of what a set does, a set simply removes all duplicates from a parameter or input array, which in this case is going to be the nums, right? And so, for example, if you were to take example 2, this array, for example, if you were to get the set of this nums array, it would remove one of these zeros because we do have a duplicate 0, right? We don't want duplicates, we just want an occurrence of 1 for every element in our input, right? And so that's exactly what a set does. So we'll store the set of the nums to be within a variable our set, and then we'll initialize a longest variable that's going to be essentially equal to 0 because we actually haven't scanned through the array, or in this case our set, yet. And what the longest variable's job is it basically marks or stores the longest length recorded so far based on our iterations of the set to see how long in the current iteration our consecutive elements actually are. Right? So now that we have our longest variable, and of course ultimately we'll be returning this longest variable because it will eventually store the most elements or greatest amount of consecutive elements within our input array nums. Okay, and so we can simply return this longest once we're complete with our main chunk of code. Right, so now that we've defined our variables and grabbed the set of the nums, removing all duplicates, let's actually start, like I said, the main chunk of our code. So we'll loop through every single element within our set. So we'll say for I in our set, we have to check if I minus 1, right? If I minus 1 is actually not in the set, that means, sorry, this should be our set rather than set. So if I minus 1 is actually not in our set, or basically the set of the nums, it is the start of a new cycle. It is the first consecutive element that's going to keep expanding forward until we don't have another consecutive element that's within our infinite array nums. So if I minus 1 is not in our set, okay, then that means this is the start of a new cycle. For example, if we have 1, 2, 3, and 4, in this case, if we're checking the current iteration and we're at 3 within our set, we know that 3 minus 1, 2, 2 is actually within our infinite array num. So this isn't the start of a new cycle, and so we don't actually have to start working on any longest variable or anything. But if we were to encounter 1, 1 minus 0, 0 is actually not in this array. And so 1 is actually the beginning, or this element is the start of the next cycle that we're going to be monitoring and checking if its length, or the window, is actually greater than the longest variable, or the length that we've recorded so far. Right, so if I minus 1 is not in our set, we'll say while, let's do it like this. We'll grab a length to be equal to 1. And the length is basically the current length for this window that we're currently looking at, and we're going to initialize it to 1 because we've obviously only seen one element that's consecutive, and we're going to keep expanding forward until we don't have or meet that criteria anymore. So we'll have a length equal to 1, and it'll say while length plus I is actually in our set, while length plus I is in our set. So while we actually have consecutive elements, we'll simply increase our length by 1, or increment it by 1. And then after this while loop is done, once this while loop stops executing, that basically means that we ran out of consecutive elements. The window is non-valid anymore. We have found all the consecutive elements that are within our infinite array nums, or in this case the set of nums, and we've expanded our window like so. So we'll keep incrementing our length by 1 and moving on to the next value that we're currently looking at until we run out of consecutive elements. Right, and once we've done that, we've basically got our length to be matching to our length of our current window that has consecutive elements. And of course, we'll set the longest to be the maximum of course, itself, and the length, or basically the length of the current window that we're looking at that has or stores all of these consecutive elements. That actually matches the amount of consecutive elements that we have in this specific iteration of our infinite array nums. Right, and once we've got that longest equal to the maximum value of course, itself and the length, we're basically done with the code, and we can ultimately return longest as so. And if we were to submit this code, unless they made any syntax errors, it should be completely fine. And as you can see, it's just about as efficient as you can get. Right, you can't really beat this. I mean, it beats 100% of almost 100% of users, both memory and runtime wise, and it is just about as efficient as you can get. So if you guys enjoyed this solution and learned something new, please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. It really does mean a lot, and it does motivate me to post new videos on this channel about programming and Leetcode in general. And so I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.